The gate of the Gdańsk shipyard is a place symbolic of the political changes in Poland. It was at this gate that the end of the strike and the signing of the agreements were announced on August 31st, 1980. The power imposed by the Soviets, this power that drew its source from that apparatus of Soviet repression, had to succumb and sign an agreement with society, in fact. The strike lasted 2 weeks. The workers disregarded the consequences, although they had in their minds the tragic events of December 1970. It was on December 17th that the military opened fire on protesting workers without warning. 45 people were killed, more than 1,100 were wounded, and 3,000 were brutally beaten and then arrested. The signing of the August agreements 44 years ago marked the beginning of the unique but also clear on its face trade union, social movement that was solidarity, a union that saw freedom and the desire for that freedom in terms of the entire social group of Poles, as well as freedom and commitment to tradition and values. Activists eventually led to the signing of the August agreements. Among the 21 demands were the establishment of new self-governing trade unions, as well as the restriction of censorship and the release of political prisoners. The events of August 1980 are among the most important events in the history of our beloved homeland. It is so important that we stand at the post as members of solidarity and, in addition to taking care of labor issues, taking care of our beautiful history. On the wave of the strike's success, Edward Gierek's government fell and the Solidarity Trade Union was formed, with 10 million citizens joining. The widespread interest in the movement posed a threat to the communist government, and so the Carnival of Solidarity ended on December 13, 1981, the day martial law was imposed. Konrad Chmioła, Gdańsk, Republika. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This is the new strategy of the Ukraine command, which unequivocally rejects the policy of red lines and clearly declares no qualms. After the Russian attack on Kharkiv, in which 7 civilians were killed, Ukraine launched a missile attack on the Russian city of Belgorod. According to the NATO chief's assessment, Ukraine has every right to defend itself on its own terms. Another shocking attack by the Russians. They dropped powerful guided bombs on Kharkiv. They hit an apartment building, a park, and streets full of civilians. They killed 7 people, including a 14-year-old girl. The child was only 14 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She has just lost her father, who went missing in the Donetsk region. We just recovered from the news about her father, and now this. It is simply impossible to get over this. How is this possible? I don't know. They are children. The world condemned the crime. Experts expressed outrage, but Kiev responded to Moscow very unequivocally for the first time since the outbreak of the full-scale war. A few hours after the attack on Kharkiv, Ukraine bombed the Russian city of Belgorod. An eye for an eye. These are terrible, hideous Russian strikes directly on apartment buildings, on a city park. Russia will certainly be held accountable for all its evil, but everyone in the world must remember that the most effective tactic is to prevent evil from acting. This containment of evil consists of long-range weapons, missiles that will be able to reach not only the warehouses at the rear of the Russian front, but also the Russian airfields deep inside Russia, on which the bombers attacking Ukraine are stationed. Because this would allow Ukraine to preserve its combat potential. It would also preserve what it has been able to capture in the Kursk region and would reduce the possibility of a Russian response. Continued training of soldiers who enter combat on the front lines is also important. The contact group of countries supporting Ukraine has discussed this issue many times. There have even been declarations about sending instructors to Ukraine. The final mission is to be carried out in the immediate vicinity.
Finally, we decided that the training will be as close as possible to Ukraine, but not in Ukrainian territory, not in Ukrainian land, but a cell in Kyiv will be open in order to ensure the best coordination with Ukraine and our partners.
Ukrainians are continuing their assault in the Kursk region. Over the past 24 hours, they were to occupy 3 more towns. According to Kiev, this is a buffer zone and an exchange fund. Russian soldiers taken prisoner are exchanged for Ukrainian prisoners. There is an ongoing dispute in the Polish government over the housing loan for a start, with some ministers saying there will be one and others saying there won't be one. Difficulty in accessing housing is one of the biggest problems facing Poles. The solution was supposed to be the introduction of 0% credit, promised by Donald Tusk during the election campaign. A corresponding provision was even included in the legendary 100 specifics for the first 100 days of government. We will introduce a loan with an interest rate of 0% for the purchase of a first apartment. As with almost all other promises, this one too has yet to be fulfilled. There is no agreement on such a solution in the December 13th coalition. Its introduction is not wanted by the left and Poland 2050. Why is 0% credit a bad public policy? Because it leads to higher housing prices. And this is proven in Poland, as well as by examples in other countries. Then why is the PSL, which I understand has access to the same data as the minister, pushing this project the whole time? I don't know.
Panie redaktorze, nie wiem.
Katarzyna Pełczyńska-Nałęcz announced on social media that funding for the 0% loan was not in next year's draft budget. Poland's prime minister has a different opinion on the subject. It appears that members of the government are unable to agree even on the facts. The minister's statements on this subject are inaccurate, and the facts are different. I will be expecting the minister to explain why she has interpreted our decision in a very inaccurate manner, especially since the minister herself participated in the decision. The pushback in the government continues, and there is still no clear answer to the question of how to help Poles buy their first apartment. The discussion over the future of the healthcare fee is similar. Within the coalition, 4 competing proposals for change competed against each other. In the end, a compromise was worked out, which neither fully satisfied any of the formations forming the government, nor brought concrete relief for entrepreneurs. Looking at these politicians, one should have far-reaching doubts whether they have any views at all. Because if these far-left socialists get along with ultra-liberals to form a joint government, after which they don't implement any reforms, that means they don't have views. They just have a desire to rule and enjoy the frustrations of power. A convenient excuse for Donald Tusk's team, explaining the lack of reforms, is President Andrzej Duda, who is allegedly preventing changes. The problem is that the bills don't even make it to the president's desk. So the facts are that the biggest obstacle for the new government is the new government. Maciej Struk, Republika. Just before the anniversary of Germany's treacherous attack on Poland, Frankfurter Rundschau writes about Poland's highest defense spending in NATO. Poland spends 4% of GDP on defense, as if it were on its own in the event of war, and could not count on the treaty support of its alliance partners, as if it could be betrayed, as happened after September 1st, 1939. Because today, Germany is increasingly making it clear that it wants to take over responsibility for the defense of Central and Eastern Europe. The Germans themselves have the Bundeswehr in ruins. Their closest political associates don't even allocate 2% of GDP, even though that's a NATO requirement, and they resent Poland, which borders Russia and Belarus, for simply taking care of its own security. Record spending on the army that begun under the Law and Justice government was supposed to build the strength of the Polish army as the basis for defending NATO's eastern flank. That's why our army was to be strengthened, both in numbers and in modern military equipment, from the United States and South Korea. It so happens that contracts that were prepared when I was the Minister of National Defense are not signed. I will not let it go. I will ask and put pressure. The problem is that the Tusk coalition is not particularly in a hurry to implement the contracts negotiated by the previous government. It seems that the current authorities have a problem with implementing contracts for the Polonization and production in Poland of K2 tanks, or the purchase of 500 U.S. HIMARS missile launchers, among other things. Postponing the implementation of agreements that were previously made is clearly working against the country's security. The question arises whether the new government is not about changing alliances from the United Right's close ally, the United States, to Donald Tusk's traditional ally, Germany. The problem is that the German army has been in trouble for years with funding, modernization, and equipment conditions. Even providing protection to Lithuania, where the entire country has less than 3 million people, where one brigade is to be stationed, is the biggest defense challenge facing the German state, which is a country of more than 80 million people. Today, all indications are that Germany, despite its hype about taking responsibility for the defense of Central and Eastern Europe, for the time being, does not have the strength to do so. Meanwhile, the search for a Moscow-controlled kamikaze drone that violated Poland's airspace has been going on for 5 days now, so far without success. The government is completely uninterested in the fact that somewhere on our territory, a deadly weapon may be lying. When a similar story happened during the United Right government, Donald Tusk's politicians called for the resignation of the head of the Ministry of Defense. Today, they remain silent. Radosław Jankiewicz, Republika.